Здравейте! Аз съм Милена Иванова, а това е подкастът Неуморимите, създаден в партньорство с Капитал. Неуморимите е една мечта за това, какво може да сме ние, каква може да е България, благодарение и поради нас. Неуморимите е подкаст, в който разказвам истории, през разговори с най-обикновени, необикновени българи, пръснати по цял свят, прескочили безброй препятствия по пътя си, успели и успяващи. През поделените истории, Неуморимите е един разказ за България, такава каквато е и такава каквато може да е. Защото всички ние сме България, без значение къде сме. Добре дошли и приятно пътешествие! Здравейте и добре дошли в сезон 4 на Неуморимите. Гостът ми днес е англоговорящ и като така разговорът ще продължи на английски, но пък темата, надявам се, е достатъчно интересна и ще извини факта, че за някой от вас ще се наложи да гледате с субтитри. И така, I switch to English. My guest today is Mark Hъфам, producer and member of the Producers Guild of America, PGA. Mark began his career in film in 1987, or maybe before that, he just couldn't remember, as an assistant director and production manager. Since then, he has produced 46 titles, including feature films and TV series. Just to name drop 3 titles, to give you an idea of what he has under his belt as productions. Napoleon, the latest Ridli Scott film with Joaquin Phoenix. The Martian, again a Ridli Scott film with Matt Damon. And in a very different direction, in a very favorite film of mine, Mamma Mia, which I've seen, I must have seen at least 10 times. Mamma Mia, the movie. Oh wait, and then there's the TV series, season 1 of Game of Thrones, and one may say the rest is history. Today we talk about film, the film industry at large, and then Bulgaria's place, or not, on the global map of film and filmmaking. Welcome to the podcast, Mark. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so grateful because I know how very, very tight your shooting schedule is at the moment. You'll tell us what you're up to in Bulgaria. We'll get there. So ultimately, this is about film. It's a conversation about film, the film industry, the future of film, and Bulgaria, because this podcast, in fact, is I want to talk with my guests about the dream of Bulgaria. And while you may not have a dream for Bulgaria, you may tell us how we may make one dream come true. So that's where we are going at the end of it. But let's start midway through your career. So 2012, you work on Prometheus, a Ridli Scott film. And I thought it's your first film with Ridli Scott, but then you told me in the 80s you had a first. But the gap is big enough where let's start in 2012 and say, so from 2012 until now, you've done 8 titles from films of Ridli Scott. So I mentioned The Martian, Napoleon, and then you have House of Gucci. You have All the Money in the World, Alien, Counselor. What am I missing here?
Exodus, Gods and Kings.
There you go. So, but then you have another 19, which in the same period, which are other films, or at least that's what the database shows. But in any case, Ridli Scott, I have to quote here, the very best eye in business, according to one of the legends, Michael Dealey, the producer. That's how he describes Ridli Scott. And then as someone else put it, one of the all-time greatest. So, and you've been working with him regularly for the last 12 years. And my question here is, after this very long introduction, what is it like to produce Ridli Scott, if I may put it this way?
It's pretty fantastic.
All right. Good start.
As Michael Dealey said, he is, one of the finest, if not the finest. He is an amazing visionary director to work with. It's like people go, is it challenging? Yes, it's challenging, but he's very well prepared. He knows what he wants to get on what used to be film, but now digital. And, he has the film entirely in his head before you start filming. So that makes the producer's life easy, rather than often what happens here. They turn up in the morning and they scratch their chin and they go, I'm not quite sure what I have to do today. Okay. Ridley turns up and everybody knows what he intends to do. So yeah, he's a master.
Mm-hmm. And so Ridley is one you've worked with, Ridley Scott, excuse me, and then you actually, one of the big titles that was early on in your career was Saving Private Ryan with Steven Spielberg, and then you have Philip Kaufman, John Madden, Peter Howitt, Philida Lloyd, etc., etc. So a lot of strong characters, I imagine, and a lot of very creative people. And my question for you as a producer is, how do you make sure? So Ridley Scott is a very organized one, you say, and he knows what he wants to do. But how do you make sure that the production happens, that it gets delivered on time and on budget, which are the two most important things as far as the producer's job is concerned, or not?
From my point of view as a producer, that there are three, and you've got two of them. Of course, the third one is to make a good film.
Yes.
Or a good TV show. But yes, to make a great show on time and on budget is what you strive to do. Mm-hmm. And I've been very fortunate. Some of those names you have mentioned are very organized. Mm-hmm. I'll not say who are the ones who are less organized. But part of the job is, if you have somebody, you look at them, you'll see what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. And to stay on time, stay on budget, you shore up what their weaknesses are by, putting people around them who know exactly what they are doing, who can guide them through things that they may just not have come across before, or often they are very early on in their career and they just don't have the experience. So it's just all part of building the team. And so
there's a portion of psychology then for you, for your job.
There's a big portion of psychology. So yes, it is. There's a big portion of psychology. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, you have to actually get inside their heads while they're trying to get inside your head. No. But anyway, so you have to get inside their heads, understand where they're going to be fine, and understand where they're going to need help, and try and help them as much as possible.
Okay, so let's take a step back and go to the beginning of your career, even though you don't quite remember the very, very beginning. But how did your career actually end up here? What were the lucky breaks? Where were the inflection points? Which way did you enter, actually? Because I know different people that have come through different sides of, because there are different functions, including directors who have been art, or in fact you told me Ridley Scott came through the art department.
Correct.
Or yes. So which was your way?
My way was, I had no idea. I wanted to make film or TV at any stage.
A lot of people have that happen to them.
As a young person, I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do. So by accident, and through my dad, who had a friend who worked in the BBC in Belfast, I ended up going in to do 3 days of work when I was 17. And those 3 days of work obviously went quite well, because they asked me, well, they certainly put my life on a track. And those 3 days of work led into about 2 years of work within the BBC, on and off. And then I did all sorts of things: the post room, the print room, made a lot of tea and coffee, and then I ended up on the studio floor doing television drama. And I kind of was the first time I went, okay, I get this, I like this, I could maybe do all right here. And yeah, so I started, and I just worked my way through all sorts of different jobs. I worked with props, I worked as an assistant floor manager in television, and then I worked with a production manager who said to me, do you fancy going freelance and doing a Mike Leigh film? And I said, yeah, why not? I was young. It was like, here, it's all an adventure. And I did a Mike Leigh film, which was, an education. And then there were, I just kind of worked my way up through the industry. And then I became, as you'd said, a production manager. And as a production manager, I was working in Ireland. And the producer I was working for, who is a proper old-fashioned English producer, quite scary, had said at the end of the film, which was a Peter Yates film. Peter Yates is the director who did a film called Bullet, which was one of my favorite films as a kid. And he said, well, do you ever fancy working outside of Ireland? And I'd said, yeah, why not? Whatever. Whatever. And anyway, about 6 months later, the phone goes and Nigel says, I am doing a Ridley Scott film in the Caribbean. Would you fancy doing it? And I'm going, what is actually wrong about that offer? I couldn't think of anything. What? The Ridley Scott in the Caribbean, and it was all on ships and boats, and I'm going, great. And so I did a film called White Squall with Ridley, which was an adventure. A complete adventure. It was either
the film itself or the shooting, the production.
The shooting of the film was a complete adventure. And it was definitely a do or die situation because many things went wrong in the Caribbean, out of anybody's control. But
were you shooting in August and then it was hurricane
season?
No,
we managed not to get hit by a hurricane, but everything else that could go wrong went wrong, and it was like, just how do you keep going? And actually, it was the first time first time working with Ridley, but first time I realized what makes those great directors great is no matter what you throw at them, they know how to keep going, and they know how to get out of a problem, or they don't put their heads in their hands and go, oh, I can't deal with this. They go, okay, well, what are we going to do? And as I say, every other day we had a minor disaster.
All right.
So, but anyway.
There you go. All right. And then in 2011, you were awarded a very British and very royal title award, the CBE. For those of us who've lived on the island, we know, but it's Commander of the Order of the British Empire, and you got it in the 2011 Queen's Birthday Honours list, which is around beginning of summertime, I assume. So I couldn't quite time it. What were the things that led to this award?
Well, I think quite a lot of what led to that award was I am from Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland didn't really have a film and television industry. I kind of thought, you know what, I like working at home. I think it's a great place. And I thought, well, here, why do we not improve the industry here? So I started making small films, largely with local talent, so local directors, local writers, local actors, but trying to make international films. So, but not big budget, very small budget, but we had a distribution deal with an American distributor for these little films we made, and the whole idea was to bring on local talent. Anyway, one thing led to another, and it was 2008 that actually started. And then, of course, there was a world financial crash in 2008, and we kept trying to make the films, but it got more and more difficult because often with films, it's people's free money that gets invested in films because it's quite a risky business. And so I ended up having to go back to the day job and just do producing of really American films. So I ended up doing an American film in Belfast, but quite a big film for Northern Ireland because it's not a very big place. And we did it, and it was very successful. And that then led on to HBO giving me a ring. And HBO, well, it actually, we'll just stick with the HBO part of the story, but HBO gave me a ring and saying, we're thinking about doing this book as a series called Game of Thrones. We like to make a pilot first of all. So would you be interested? And we actually priced it for all over. We priced it for Belfast, we priced it for Dublin, we priced it for Vancouver, and Belfast basically came out on top as the cheapest. And the only place wetter than Belfast, funny enough, is Vancouver. So we had a price advantage and actually remarkably slightly less rainfall.
3 days less per year.
3 days less per year. Only 300 days of rain. So we kind of set off to make the pilot for Game of Thrones, which was an unmitigating disaster.
Mm-hmm.
There is only 3 scenes of the original pilot in the first episode of the season, but the gentleman in charge of HBO at the time, called Mike Lombardo, was very brave. Even though he thought the pilot was not good, he could see that there was something good in it, and he said, let's fix what was wrong. And that's why they like to make a pilot, so they can, you know, it's like doing a prototype.
Yeah.
You take what's not right and you fix it. And so we fixed it. Not that we necessarily knew we'd fixed it at that time, but we fixed it, and we went and we started to shoot the series, where we reshot all of episode 1, bar the 3 scenes I'd said. And anyway, then it went on to become a huge success.
Yeah.
And I think probably it was the impact that had on Northern Ireland was kind of on the economy, you know, because it had a huge spin-off onto tourism for Northern Ireland, and just general employment all round. And I think that's really what led to it. Was
so I love this, because when we get to Bulgaria, but so you've done it already. You've put a place on the map through film. So this is possible. So we'll get back to this later. But the other interesting thing here is, and I had this question for a bit later, but you, as I said, since 2012, we have these big titles with Ridley Scott, but then you also work on small budget films. Yeah. So you work on huge budgets and then on tiny budgets. Mm-hmm. And my question there was, how do you decide to take on a project? Small budgets, it's the same amount of work. Very often it's even more work, because you have to make do with a lot less resource.
Yes.
But what makes you decide? How do you choose? In the case of Ireland, I get it. So it's your motivation. What else?
It's really the material, you know, whether
so it's the story.
Yeah, it is the story. It's even you know, if it's a horror film, it's got to be a good horror film. You know, if it's a romantic drama, it's got to be a good romantic drama. If it's an action film, so it's really the material. Often it's also who the filmmakers are. So, and that means often it's somebody who's young and I think is interesting. So I think, okay, I can help them along the way. Yeah. And I've always quite enjoyed that challenge of, I've never wanted to be a director myself. So, but I've gone, if I see somebody and I think, God, they have a talent, or they have a good eye, or, you know, often what it is a writer will come to you with material and say, I would like to direct it. And you kind of go, no, the other thing, you normally go, okay, well, let's have a conversation about it. And if you think they have the right aptitude to be a director, you go writer, director.
Okay.
It's often,
so you don't say a writer cannot be a director?
No. Quite the contrary. I say a writer can often be a director.
Okay.
Now, there are some writers who are very good writers who should never direct.
Yeah.
Most of them have tried it and found that out. But yeah, so, and I have always liked to do large projects and small projects, because I think you can get typecast very easy, and it's actually also keeps you sharp.
Yeah. Interesting.
You learn all sorts of things from doing things with very little money, because you don't have money to get you out of trouble.
Yeah.
And so you carry that over into bigger films, and you say, well, let's use this, you know.
Yeah. Interesting. So, which brings me to, and you did mention you've worked on pretty much any and all genres. I don't know if there's one you can name
except
that
for
you
a
have.
Western.
Okay, so you still, or you never will
No, I want to do a Western.
You want to do a Western,
but I've never done one.
There you go. So everything but Western. And the question there is, do you have a favorite genre out of?
I like science fiction.
Okay.
A lot. I like watching science fiction movies. I've only done one musical, but I thoroughly enjoyed it.
That was amazing. I love it.
And that was an education, but I thoroughly enjoyed doing that. But yeah, I would say science fiction would be my favorite genre for both making and watching.
And consuming. And in terms of production, Which is the most expensive genre, or it really depends? It could be in any of them.
It could be in any of them. I mean, science fiction is expensive because often you're creating the world, or more often than not, you're creating the world. And normally there's a few monsters running around, and monsters are never cheap.
Monsters are never cheap. Don't buy monsters, okay?
But as I say, I thoroughly enjoyed making a musical. I got to make it with, pretty amazing, Benny and Bjorn from ABBA.
Yeah.
Fantastic people to work with. Meryl Streep.
Yeah.
My personal favorite. But so it was great fun.
Yeah. It was a commercial success as well.
It was a huge. At the time, it was Universal's biggest film for about 8 years.
Okay.
So it's now, of course, been eclipsed by quite a few others. But then.
Yeah. All right. And so you as a producer, and we've mentioned you live out of a suitcase. And I was saying earlier, you're the only person I know who manages more out of a hand carry-on than me. I hate checking in luggage, but I cannot live for months out of a carry-on. And now I've met my... you've bested me, but anyhow, so you've spent because of projects, and I call it living. When you travel all the time, I used to call my hotel room home. I'm going home tonight to my hotel room, but it's home because that's where I am. So what are the challenges when you choose a career like yours? In a way, living out of a suitcase, 9 months in Australia, 12 months in New Zealand, and then 3 months in Morocco, or I don't know how many, or Jordan, etc., etc. What has the industry, in other words, given and taken from you, or your line of work?
Well, I think I like travel.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy travel. Mm-hmm. I like going to different places. So that's all been an experience. Mm-hmm. It's not, maybe you don't get to spend as much time at home as you would like. Mm-hmm. So that is probably the takeaway. Mm-hmm. And then the give is you get to go to all these amazing places. Mm-hmm. You also get to go to some less amazing places, it has to be said. But, it is, to me, it's an adventure.
Mm-hmm. But your son, therefore, has lived himself and studied in a bunch of different places as well,
and I don't think it's done
him. And he likes it?
Yes.
He's happy?
Yes.
Happy child. Excellent.
I don't think it's done him any harm.
No. Right. And so talking about film, expensive film, I wanted to talk a bit about disaster in film. And you did mention your first experience was a disaster every other day or every day. And I dug yesterday, I went and looked online, the biggest disaster in film. And one case study I had studied in school was Cleopatra, the making of the film Cleopatra, which I asked you. And so the budget was $2 million. This is 1963, and $2 million was a pile of money. The film went $42 million over budget. So this is like 21 times the budget. Probably this way they have not been bested ever, but that's one. And in today's money, this actually translates into almost $500 million. It's not the biggest by today's standards, but it's still out there. And then The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, which was never released. You said there was a documentary about how it was made or not made. And then Heaven's Gate, which in industry history is the film that put producers, the need for these tight-fisted producers to control the creative side, put it clearly on the map and apparently changed the industry forever. That's how it is. But have you actually yourself worked on films where it's gone dramatically over budget, or there has been a massive disaster, or you've needed to come in and turn around a production?
First of all, I wasn't born before Cleopatra, so I'm not responsible. But I mean, I've come in on a couple of occasions on films that have thought they were in trouble, or the studio have thought they've been in trouble. you know, one quite famously is World War Z, where they had kind of finished the film and didn't have a film. So I came in and did a reshoot. So we reshot for 6 weeks on the film.
And they had done how many weeks before?
Oh, they'd shot for 14 weeks before.
Okay.
They had a great opening then. And so I had been asked by Paramount, who I'd worked with before, and they said, would I come in and would I do this reshoot and whatever? And I said, fine. It actually happened to fit very nicely between two Ridley films, and I went, fine, I'll go and do this. And it's only 6 weeks. How bad could it be? So we went in and did I would say a very efficient surgical job of shooting scenes throughout the film, and then we reshot the third act in its entirety. And then the film worked pretty well, and the film went on to be a huge success.
But what had gone wrong before that? Why did they not have a film after 16 weeks of...
So what had or my assessment of what had happened, which actually happens quite a lot. They get a quite talented director, but who is not used to doing that scale of film. And then they decide who they will put around him. And on that occasion, they put people who I would have thought were not good choices. And so you end up with somebody who's, you know, slightly out of their own depth. But then you give them support, supposedly, that there's not really any support whatsoever. So I think you just end up with a very creative free zone. And
so the creativity is missing, and it becomes very formulaic.
And the director of that film, I personally think, is a very creative director, but he just was surrounded by the studio, by the wrong people at the time. So he still was the director when we came in to do the 6 week reshoot, and we just surrounded him by an entirely different team. And took an entirely different approach.
Dr. Mark.
Well, I'm certainly not a doctor, but maybe butcher.
Surgical. Surgeon. All right. Okay. And so have you walked away from a project, or have you had to fire yourself? Or have been in a position, fire a director?
Fire myself every day.
You fire yourself every day. Well, you wish, right?
I don't think I've ever walked away from a project.
Okay. So
I've come very close to it.
All. Okay.
I've come very close to it, but I don't think I've ever walked away.
You bit your tongue and you survived.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's talk TV.
Yes.
You've done TV.
I have.
A little bit. So... Game of Thrones, we already talked quite a bit about it. I love the story with putting Ireland on the map there. But TV versus film. What are the differences when you work on a TV series project or a film for TV as opposed to a film for cinemas?
People always ask me the question. I don't really see any difference. I go, and especially now TV has got so large, the budgets for these big shows are so opulent that you would be going a big TV show and a big film. Yes, the schedule is a whole lot longer on a big TV show. But that's only because you're doing 10 hours rather than 2.5 hours or 3 hours. So many of the disciplines are the same. You know, people will say to you, you know, on a film, there is only, you know, the person who is in charge is the director. They say in television, it's the producer who is in charge. I don't really even see that. I go, the thing is a team event at all times. But yes, the bigger the show on TV, the more it becomes like a feature film. You know, and those things. So when I did Game of Thrones, I kind of went, well, I only brought the experience I had from doing some television and a lot of films. And you know, it was, I did not find it difficult. So.
And the politics of TV
Lot
as
more
opposed
politics.
to
A lot more politics. A lot, you know, a lot more. What is it? There's a lot more chefs in the kitchen and not enough cooks. No.
Yeah.
There are many voices in that room, where often on a feature film with the certain directors that I work with, you know, there is one.
Yeah.
Or there's one.
And since we are talking film, we cannot skip the star power and the actors and actresses. And I was looking at your list of projects or films yesterday, and it was my impression, and you did confirm it in our conversation before we started. You've produced a number of films where the actors or actresses were not yet what they became, and my curiosity there was, can you see and say this person has the star power?
You can.
Is gonna be. Can you see that?
You can. You normally see it very quickly.
Okay.
And you now that doesn't mean they all become that
Yeah.
star, but you see the ones who
The
have the potential.
yeah.
And they do. They stand out.
What do you see actually?
That's a really hard thing to quantify. It's just they have a presence, and often that presence isn't until the camera's rolling. So they might be quiet and shy, and you gotta go, well, don't know what the fuss is about that person. And then the minute the camera turns over, all of a sudden there's a different presence. And yeah, you know, there is always a talent there. Now, there are movie stars who are movie stars. So you might go, they're not the best actor in the world, but they have a movie star quality to them.
So that charisma, was that thing around them, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you saw in '97, you saw a young Matt Damon. He had already shot a bunch of things, but he was rather young and not the breakout star. And then 17 years or 15, 16 years later, you had him in Martian. How did that compare?
He was still a nice guy, which was...
So he is a nice guy, because I've heard that it varies with actors.
Yeah, he was still a nice guy. You know, he was very young, but you could tell right away, you know, and it's like Spielberg definitely, when he picked him, knew that he was picking a star of the future. No question about it. And I think Saving Private Ryan also, that was probably, I'm thinking, had he done Good Will Hunting before then?
Yes, just before, 2 years before.
2 years before.
Year or two,
so I think that was, you know, Good Will Hunting, I guarantee, is where Stephen had seen him and went, okay, there's a young man with talent. And then the huge success of Ryan just then propelled him on his way. So yes.
And Joaquin Phoenix, again, you've seen him more than once.
I have.
Yeah.
Yes. Amazing.
Yeah.
One of the nicest people I've ever come across in this industry. An absolute gentleman and a true professional. I mean, when he is on a film, he is on a film. He is 100% invested. You know, and there's never a complaint. There's never anything difficult about him. He is just there and he wants to work.
And how important is the chemistry between director and especially for the lead?
I think it's a very important chemistry, and I'm sure some of the disasters that we've talked about happening will have been down to the chemistry between the lead actor, actress, and the director, or between the lead actor and the lead actress. So the chemistry is very important. You know, if you have good chemistry, you're not going to have problems.
Okay, chemistry.
If you have bad chemistry, you're in serious trouble.
What's the biggest budget you've worked on?
I think it's Napoleon.
Okay. How big was the budget?
Big.
Is it public, or I haven't dug? All right.
More than 250 million.
Okay. Yeah.
Dollars.
Is it a success, financially speaking?
Well, so it was made for
It's
Apple.
early still, so yes.
So it was never made to have a theatrical release. It was always made for the streaming service because they were launching their streaming service. So they wanted to launch it with 5 or 6 big tentpole projects, which Napoleon was picked as one of them. So it was made for a streamer.
Yeah.
But then Tom Rothman, who's the head of Sony Studios, had seen the film early on and is a big fan of Ridley's. And Tom Rothman said, you know what, it's a shame not to give this a theatrical release. And Tom Rothman said, I'll finance the theatrical release. It can't do you guys any harm.
Yeah.
And, my risk is only the P&A.
Yeah.
So it was unlikely he was going to lose money on it.
Yeah.
And you go, one helps cross-fertilize the other one.
Yeah.
So you go, well, decent, and it did have a decent theatrical release. So then lots of people who still haven't found their way back into the cinema, which we should talk about that.
But we are making a very nice transition to this,
but
so I'm loving it.
A lot of people haven't found their way back in the cinema, but the press that Napoleon and Killers of the Flower Moon got from theatrical releases then boosted the numbers on
Apple.
Streaming service for Apple. So it was a win-win situation for everybody involved.
Yeah.
So
very interesting. We are getting to the future of film and to what's going on in the industry in the last 5, 6, I don't know how many years. But before that, just to wrap up your career, most beautiful location you've shot at and the most out of this world that you've been or you've seen?
Wadi Rum, probably, in Jordan.
What did you shoot there? Martian? Or?
We shot The Martian there.
The Martian.
Only for 8 days because we shot most of it on stage in Hungary. We shot some of Prometheus there. And we shot some of All the Money in the World there.
Okay, so it is a favorite location.
It's a very, very beautiful place. The next most beautiful place is probably Tullymore Forest in Northern Ireland.
Okay, all right.
So, which is this amazing forest park, which is stunning, and I've shot a lot there too. And then the other one I'd have to add is the Seychelles. It's a pretty beautiful place to film as well.
All right. And you told me when we first met that one never knows whether a film is going to be a breakout success or not. But still, what are the ingredients without which the magic is never gonna happen?
I've never seen a bad script be turned into a good film. Sadly, I've seen a few very good scripts be turned into not the film they should have been. But I think, you've got to start with a good script.
Story,
yeah, it's got to be the story. It's all story, and then you add the stars and the director and whatever, and hopefully it comes together.
And while you're shooting, do you see this has the potential? This is happening.
You do.
Yeah. So you already have an idea in the production process.
I mean, it's the audience that tells you. So you never can be 100% sure.
Yeah.
But you can at least go, we're making a good film. Then it comes down to, can the marketing people get that good film out there and get it in front of the audience and, get people interested. But if you've made a good film or else.
Yeah. But as you say, it's a team sport.
It's a team sport.
Biggest satisfaction from a job well done for you?
I don't know. It's Saving Private Ryan's very high up there on that. Mamma Mia's very high up on that. The Martian's very high up on that list. I did a little film in Ireland called Mickey Bo and Me, which I am still exceptionally proud of, which dealt with the political issues of Northern Ireland at the time. That's here.
So it's the final product,
Yes.
Yeah. And I was talking last night with someone and they said, this thing, if you do it for money, find another job, as in money is not enough to survive through the difficult times, and you will have difficult times. So What is it that drives you to overcome the difficult moments at the end of the day in what you do?
I mean, I think the driving force is you enjoy what you do, but also you want to be proven that you cannot be beaten.
Aha, the competitive spirit.
So you want to just go, you know, as I say to people, you know, impossible is not a word in our industry. It's just how much have you got?
Money, you mean, or
yes, money. No, but I'm saying it's like you can
Yeah.
you can now with the world of visual effects, you can do anything
Yeah.
if you've enough money. But I think it is a let's not be beaten. Let's not roll over on any occasion just because somebody says the weather's gone against you, or you just go, right, well, let's just put on another coat and get on with it.
A very British attitude there. Would you ever stop making films? Is the magic still there for you? Have things changed? You said after the pandemic.
Yeah, I think COVID has had a big impact on what has taken a lot of fun, and I don't think it's just the film industry. I think COVID still has taken fun out of life. I kind of find the enthusiasm from people is not quite the way it was. You know, and it used to be, and especially when you do what we do, is most people want to see you, most people want to encourage you to come. But yeah, COVID's definitely had an impact, and I think that's not just in the film industry, but it has taken a bit of a fun out of it. I think probably 3 years of making films and TV wearing a mask had kind of, and we were the lucky ones. We were the ones that were allowed to keep working, you know. So
what did you produce during COVID?
House of Gucci,
Yeah.
a TV show called The Swarm, Napoleon,
Yeah.
and there's one other. Oh, The Northman.
Yeah. So you were busy.
Yes. As I say, we were the lucky ones.
Yeah,
We were
yeah.
allowed to keep working, and lots of people weren't able to, and
Yeah.
we were. So, but we, you know, we went through a lot of COVID measures to make sure that people were kept
Which
safe.
added also a lot of expense
A lot
on
of
top
expense,
of
yeah.
everything. It was crazy. But
So,
so the future of film industry, you already mentioned the streamers, and I love this as an introduction. So Napoleon actually was produced for Apple, and then this interesting business model where someone comes in and has a risk-free option to distribute as long as they can agree. I love this as a business case, but streaming and the bottomless spewing of content, and sometimes we go in the evening and we're trying to watch something, an hour and a half later we're still browsing and we go to bed, meaning quantity does not equate quality. But where is your thinking on what has happened and what it means for the future of the industry, of storytelling, of producing?
So I think we've seen this huge boom to create content, most of it very poor. But you push that red button on whichever streaming service and they count it as a view. So it doesn't matter if you've watched 2 minutes of it, 10 minutes of it, or all of it, you viewed it. So what's considered to be a success, I am very interested in how they come up with that conclusion. And then we've had we've had 10 years of this huge boom in the industry, which has been great in a lot of ways. It's also been damaging in a lot of ways, because I would go, every person that I have worked with up until that period did it because they loved it, wanted to do it, wanted to be involved. And then it became like it's a regular job. And it's not a regular job. You don't go to work at 9 o'clock and come home at 5 o'clock, as I think you probably know very well. You know, you're not. Lots of people didn't do it for the money. They had to make a living, but they did it because they enjoyed it. They liked what they were doing. And then all of a sudden, this boom made it more like a regular job. And lots of people came into the business. Lots of people came into the business because they went, you can make a very good living in this business. but they weren't really
So it's going back
invested.
to this: if you do it for the money, don't.
Don't.
Only for the money, right?
Yes.
But that's where we are, is
Yes.
what you're saying.
And then we've had strikes in America, which
Yeah.
has a huge impact on the entire industry across the world,
Yep,
because
we've seen it here.
it's still the biggest majority of material is generated from America. In other words, it's financed from America, it's commissioned from America. So all of a sudden, because of the SAG strikes and the other strikes, the writer strikes, there was a vast reduction in content. And part of the thing about the strikes was the streamers. Everybody thought the streamers were making a fortune.
And they weren't,
And
by
they
the
weren't.
way.
And they weren't.
They were spending a fortune.
They were spending
with
a
the
fortune.
hope of someday making a fortune, but yeah.
So all of a sudden, it's like, oh, well, we want to see what your profit and loss accounts are. And all of a sudden, the streamers are making a lot less material now. And I am going to go and say, I don't think we will ever see in my lifetime the boom that there was. Now,
maybe that's good news for quality.
that's exactly what I'm going to get to. You're way ahead of me. I think it is good news for quality. I think people are going to be more selective now, and it's what is quality. They're going to make quality material, but you know, there's commercial quality material, which you've got to do if you're in it's called the film industry. So, but I think if you make really good content, people will watch it. So even if you're the streamer, you'll get that red button hit more often because it's good quality content. I'm hoping that people will go back to the theaters thing, because I
So
still
you're
think,
hopeful
I'm hopeful
on this
No,
with
I'm
the
hopeful.
young generation.
I'm hopeful the young
Okay.
generation. I'm thinking, you know, the young generation, it's still a great night out. It's still not the most expensive night out, not the cheapest
Very
night out
cheap.
either.
Well, compared.
So, and I'm going, if there needs to be a more diverse spread of material to get the cinema back to where it should be, because we can't watch too many more
Franchises.
Yeah.
You're talking now.
we can't watch too many more Marvels, and I'm
Yeah.
not saying some
Yeah.
of them are very good
Yeah.
and some of them are terrible.
Yeah.
So, and I think people have got bored. So people
Yeah.
want more interesting things, and I'm going to go. Films like Oppenheimer and Barbie
And
have kind
Barbie.
of proven that people want variety. You know, so but we're not giving them that much variety yet.
Yeah.
So we need to do that. We as filmmakers need to give more variety to get the audiences interested back into the cinema.
And inevitably AI. We haven't mentioned so far, but we were talking about this with you, and you told me you have meetings, because I'm a bit cynical on the topic. And even today, you know, because now there's talk about Taiwan should pay for its security, which means we don't have chips. And if you don't have chips, you don't have AI. That's the end of the story. But anyhow, forget about this geopolitical wrinkles. AI and film, where do you see it affecting the industry? How and what do you see from people coming? Because you sit at New Regency, so you get a front seat view on where things may be going from here.
I think it will have a big impact on the industry, you know, and partly that would have been the one thing, the strikes, I would have gone, actually that's the right thing to strike about, because it is going to replace people. But that's progress. You know, I don't particularly confess to know that much about it. I am a little bit scared of it myself, as in I kind of go, James Cameron gave us a warning of what AI can do, and it's called Terminator. You know, it is, when you hear AI programs given 24 hours to learn 3 languages, and actually it learns 26 languages in the same amount of time, you go, okay, where does it stop learning? Is that fear of technology? Maybe. But it's also fear of what that technology will do. I think the whole world of visual effects in our industry, which is a big business, is going to be affected by it. And they're all at the moment busily trying to figure out how they can monetize AI so they don't lose all their profits and actually they can make more. And I'm sure somebody's going to figure it out. I have been doing a bit of research into it at the moment, and we've been looking at films that have used quite a lot of the technology, and they're pretty impressive. But it's not
for visual effects, or
for the whole effect. You know, there's a film that's coming out very shortly with Tom Hanks and Robin Wright, where they've used a vast amount of AI technology. You know, the director's a director who made Polar Express, so he's a man who likes technology, Bob Zemeckis, and he's very good with technology. So it's not like he's changing the rules for him. He always likes to push, okay, what's the new devices and new toys, and I'm going to use them, and I'm going to make it interesting. And so, but I think we're fooling ourselves if we're not thinking it equals less people, more machines.
Yeah. Maybe better quality. Who knows? Well,
maybe. Not next year or the year after, but maybe in 5 years' time, maybe better quality.
There you go. So from here back to Bulgaria, where you are at the moment. So we are recording rather in Bulgaria. You already mentioned you are from Northern Ireland, and you've put Northern Ireland on the map. So I would love for you to tell me, because obviously I'm not asking you what's your dream about Bulgaria, because you shouldn't have a dream about Bulgaria. Bulgarians should have a dream about our country, right? But that's a big theme of this podcast. But let's see if we figure it out with you as far as film is concerned, what your advice would be here. But if we start from the beginning, what are you actually doing here? Why are you here?
So we're doing a movie for the company that I'm currently working with, which is New Regency. It's a film called Watch Dogs. It's a Ubisoft game, which we're now making into a film along with Ubisoft. So it's not a big film.
Budget-wise, you mean?
Budget-wise, it's not a big film. It's going to be a very cool movie, I think. And you asked me earlier, can you tell when something's going to be good? You can tell when something's going to be good, and it's going to be good.
Okay.
So
promising.
So the experience.
Are you putting Bulgaria on the map now?
Well, I actually think Bulgaria is already on the map. You know, when I go to Northern Ireland pre 2008, you're so much further advanced here than what we were. You know, we had a big old windy shed called the Paint Hall and nothing else. You guys have got a couple of proper studio facilities already here, which seem quite busy. You know, you've got a much larger crew base already here of very good technicians. So yeah, but it's interesting. I was talking to a production designer friend of mine this morning, and we're filming at a studio called Prime Time, which has this backlot set. And he's called me and he's talking about another film he's thinking of doing, and I'm actually outside talking to him on the phone because we're recording sound inside, and I switch the video camera on and I show him the backlot set there, and he immediately gets excited, but he had no idea.
He's never heard about
it. And then I said, you should also look at New Boyana. They have a big Chicago, New York backlot set. So he immediately went online while I'm on the phone. He goes, oh my goodness. Never knew. So there's a bit of a marketing, international marketing.
Storytelling.
Yes.
Storytelling.
It's exactly that. But yes.
All right. Well, you have now spent more time in Bulgaria than 99.9% of the global population, more or less 2 months. And you have toured. You've been out of Sofia as well because you've gone on locations and sites and stuff.
And a vineyard or two.
Yeah. And so what is your impression of the country? So the industry is more advanced than anyone outside would know, anyone, for the industry. The country itself,
the countryside is beautiful and very, very varied. It has to be said, there's lots of it looks like areas of North America, which is one of the most expensive places in the world to film, and we're always looking to make things more
cheaper.
Cost effective.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I've been amazed by what I have seen and found here. And there's great variety.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also a bit amazed by how hot it gets.
It's rather unusual. Everyone would tell you to get it so early, but there's no climate change, so we don't talk about this.
Okay. But yeah, great variety. And the other thing, and this was actually, and I shouldn't say, but this was a big selling point in Northern Ireland, was people would come in, they would stay in a nice hotel, and then they'd drive to the studio, and it would be 10 or 15 minutes, which is about the same as it is here. They could drive to the mountains in 35 minutes. They could drive to a lake in 35 minutes. You know, the sea's a bit further away, it has to be said, but you still have the sea.
40 minutes flight.
Yeah. So, and that has actually been a great selling point, is you don't spend an hour every morning and an hour every night driving to either the location or driving to the studio. You know, you're filming in London and all of the studios are 40 minutes away from where you choose to stay. Of course, you could decide to stay closer, but you know, the talent always want to stay in town and go to theatre at night and whatever. So, and here, you know, we're all staying in the centre of town. We drive to the studio every day, and in most days it's 10 minutes. Yeah. And here, it makes your life easier. You work long hours, as I'd said, so at least you're not working a long day and then doing 2 hours of travel every day. So yeah. And we were talking about your experience in another country where people never smiled while you were there, and you were there a long time. And then you made the comment which almost surprised me, because when I left the country in 97, we were not smiling. We were the grimmest bunch of people you can see on the streets. And then you said, and people in Bulgaria smile, which to me was like, wow, there is progress. We are moving forward, and this is good news. We don't realize it because we're in it. But what's your impression of the people you work with on set, and just in terms of people, and then in terms of talent? So I've found the people are quite cheery, if that's the right word.
Okay.
As a rule, people are very willing. I find the technicians are excellent. So the whole experience has been a good one. You know, we'll not mention the country where I had talked about before, where I have to say, again, the talent was excellent, but you never heard anybody laugh. And you just didn't hear anybody laugh. Whereas here, it seems to be everybody has quite a good laugh. And if you come from Northern Ireland, that's all we do, because we've come out of a very dark period of history, and the only thing that always got us through was a sense of humour and having a laugh. So I'm probably very susceptible to people being cheerful and enjoying life, as opposed to being miserable and not. So I've got to say, people generally seem in good spirits.
That's
certainly
good.
On the film crew anyway.
And what would you say are shortcomings or areas of deficit that we need to work on?
So when I kind of started the whole thing in Northern Ireland, and I had a great film commission there, the Northern Ireland Film Commission, I said to them, until we have proper studios, until we have proper cash incentives, and until we have a good crew base, we're always just in the minor leagues. Now, you already have good studio facilities. You also have a reasonable crew base. You do have an incentive, but it's very...
neither here nor there.
I'm not going to say we're happily going to take it, but it wouldn't be what would attract you here. You know, it's the fact, the cost, production costs are lower here. And we've already run on another project the comparison between shooting in the UK and shooting here. But then you take in the tax credit into consideration. whereas the UK now has
30%.
Well, it's 25.9
mm-hmm.
now. At a higher budget level, and it's actually nearly 40% at a sub 15 million pound level. 15 million pound. It's nearly 40%. So, you know, here, and I'm not sure do I just say, but here you max out at $1 million or €1 million. And that is still very nice to take.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be the thing that would move the needle enough to get you to come here. Just so you got a studio film and you're just all shooting it in studio, blah blah blah. It's going to be currently the cost of production that is the attractor rather than the incentive. Yeah. And to be out there right now in the major playing field, you need a decent incentive. Yeah. And that's not it's just Australia offers 30% federal plus 9% state, so you're nearly at 40%. Italy offers 40% currently. The Germans are talking about increasing theirs now, but the German credit hasn't been that great, so they have an industry, but it's not the first place you ever look to go, even though they're very good technicians. You always go. So I'm going, the bit you're missing.
Yeah, is the tax credit. And there, okay, so you're saying that with the incentives, ultimately, even though we are still a cheaper destination, you start to come close.
Yes.
So even to a place like the UK or the US, which is quite expensive. So
yes, the US is very expensive, and that's why, you know, Atlanta, which would be the current center of the American filmmaking industry, offers a very good incentive, but it's still expensive. Yeah. But whereas you know, if you look at Italy, you look at the UK, you look at France has just come into the major playing field of where they're now doing a 30%, which if you do a certain amount of visual effects there, they enhance the entire credit to 40%. So, because people want, the thing about the industry, it does bring, even on a small film like the one we're doing, it brings a lot of, it's not like we're going to come here and spend a year to spend quite a lot of money. We're coming here and we're going to spend quite a lot of money in 12 weeks. In 6 weeks, yeah. You know, in a great big film, you might come for 9 months and you're going to spend a lot of money. But it's not like a car factory getting set up, which takes 7 years to spend the same amount of money. Okay, you go, well, that creates long-term employment, maybe. But the thing about the film industry, and this was the biggest struggle I had in Northern Ireland, was to get the government agencies on side, because they went, but you're all freelance. And I said, yes, we're all freelance. All the time. Yeah. And once they got on side, and that was a massive, you know, that was a massive boost, was when the local politicians there, who were at that time Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness, may not mean anything here, but they completely got the creative industries, and they became so supportive, and it just was like, we can do this. Yeah. And
so ultimately what the industry brings a lot of cash in a short period of time. So the investment, let's call it foreign direct investment, which then increases the velocity of money, if I convert it into banker speak, which for growth, economic growth, would definitely have the multiplier effect.
Yes.
So that's the argument.
That is the argument.
And then what you're saying, coming closer to the end and the conclusion, but what you're saying, that with your experience in Northern Ireland, you can put a country on the global map, starting from a even much lower base than what we have here already. So
you can, and it happens in a hurry too. There is no industry, I think, trains people as fast as the film and television industry. I don't think there's any industry now. Quite a lot of people in that speed of training get discarded to the side, but those who don't go on to become whatever they want to become. And it's a very, very fast training industry.
Interesting. The velocity and the multiplier I hadn't thought about, because I always have these debates in my head. Yes, but okay, You're selling me on this.
Well, the Game of Thrones figures are all pretty easy to ascertain.
Yeah.
Because they'd worked out what the, as you call it, the velocity. The velocity of it is, because they dock on to tourism, they transport everything. They kind of did an exercise just to see how every dollar spent on Game of Thrones, what it equated to the Northern Irish economy, and that I can't.
And that's with 300 days of rain.
That's with 300 days of rain.
Imagine.
Yeah.
With all the sunshine we get here. You do, but the question is if the tourists love the rain, right?
They still come.
They still come, so that's what I'm saying. So if they come with the rain, imagine what can happen here. Sunshine. I love it. Mark, that has been an amazing conversation, and thank you so much for your time again. We did use all the time we can, and I'm waiting to see how the film you're working on now here comes out, but you're saying it looks good, so I'm keeping fingers crossed. And that was a conversation with Mark Hъфан, CBE, member of the Producers Guild of America, and thank you so much, and hopefully we see you again on another project here.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. All right. Ако този разговор ви хареса и сте любопитни кои са другите гости в новия сезон 4 на Неуморимите, харесайте и ни последвайте в YouTube или предпочитаната от вас стриминг платформа. Ако познавате обикновени, необикновени българи, пръснати по белия свят и чиято история непременно трябва да бъде разказана, пишете ми на неуморимите@gmail.com. Създател и автор на Неуморимите съм аз, Милена Иванова, в партньорство с Капитал. Продуцент Иван Дойков, DR Films. Оригинална музика Петър Дондаков. Миксиране и монтаж Павлин Даскалов. Изпълнителен продуцент Капитал Ювие Изет. Отговорен редактор Капитал Зорница Стоилова. Очаквайте нови епизоди от сезон 4 всяка седмица в любимата ви стриминг платформа за аудио или YouTube за видео. Благодарим, че слушахте или гледахте.